All right. Today is August 4th, 2023. My name is Karina Pan, and I'm here with Dr. James Long on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. All right, starting off with kind of just a couple questions about your early life. So, when and where were you born?
I was born in Bangkok, Thailand, and I lived there until I was 4 years old until I moved to the United States.
How would you kind of describe like the neighborhood you grew up in, if you do remember? Although I know like 4 years old is really young.
Well, because like a lot of things were changing, like when I moved to the United States, I feel like I have one of those like flashbulb memories of like when I was younger. So I remember the neighborhood I grew up in. It was like this area, like this neighborhood, I guess, called Ban Lim Suan, which in Thai is, I believe, just translates to like houses by the meadow. And so it was like this pretty walkable neighborhood. It was like very, very low income though, like a lot of houses like very close together. But I still remember like walking around that neighborhood. I don't know. I don't know why those memories are so vivid because as you said, like it is, I was only four. Maybe like my brain is putting in some memories, but no, I remember the neighborhood very vividly. Again, like a lot of houses close together, very walkable.
Hmm. Did you ever attend school in Thailand, or were you too
Mhm.
young for that?
I attended school. I went to an international preschool. So I had not gone to like kindergarten yet, but I remember there were a lot of people from other countries there. Like, for lack of a better way to describe it, like there were a lot of white people there too, in addition to me. I remember we would, like I know classic pre-K stuff, sang songs in English, not in Thai. Um, and yeah, I don't have a ton of memories. I remember to wear a uniform. That was really annoying. I remember I was like really like throwing tantrums over how itchy the uniform was.
Yeah, no, I bet every kid would do that for sure. So was that kind of your first exposure to English, I guess, through that daycare?
I guess so. It's kind of funny because I definitely had to have learned some English there somehow, but I don't remember a lot of like the actual phrases or songs or whatever I had learned there. Most of my English, I feel like I learned actually after I moved to the United States, like after four, because I feel like after you turn four is when you start to make sense of language. That's when you start to learn how to read. And I'm not fully confident that I had really internalized a lot of that when I was in preschool.
Mm, no, yeah, definitely. And that kind of segues us to kind of your move to the US. So when exactly did that happen? And was there like a specific reason that you decided to immigrate?
Yeah. So my father had taken on a job at MIT in Boston. And so we moved to accommodate that. And again, that was like around when I was four, and pretty soon after, I was in like a daycare type situation, but pretty quickly after that, I had started kindergarten in the public school system in Boston.
Okay, got it. And so you mentioned Boston. Can you describe kind of like the area or any memories that you have of the neighborhood?
Yeah, so because my father was working for MIT, we were living on the Cambridge side of Boston, very, very close to MIT campus. So I do remember you could see like the Charles River. I don't know how familiar you are with Boston, but I could see the Charles River like from our tiny, tiny little apartment. There's this Citgo sign, like the gas station Citgo, like across the river. I remember seeing like every single night going to bed. And every time I go back to Boston, I think it's still up there. It's like really freaky to see this thing that I saw, like one of my first memories, like as a child in the United States. Beyond that, I mean, we were walking distance from MIT. I remember there were tennis courts very close by. And our building was kind of interesting. It was kind of like this mixed use housing. I think a lot of people who lived there were people who worked for MIT, or maybe they were students at MIT. And there were a lot of kids. That's what I remember. Like I remember going to a lot of my friends' apartments growing up to play with Legos, play board games, whatever. So I think that was kind of like a unique situation. I when I tell people like my friends now about it, they're like, "That's so weird that you like knew so many people in such close quarters growing up."
Right. Yeah, I think that is a really unique experience. I bet though, like as a child, such a young child, was it like a really big shock moving all the way across the world, or did you face any challenges like and getting used to America?
I mean, academically, yes, it is a huge change, but I think when you're a kid, like every day is so new and different, and then you're just kind of rolling with it. It's like, oh, brand new adventure, new place. We're moving countries. Like that's the same as like moving down the street sometimes when you're a kid. So I don't know. I think it was kind of neat. I mean, I remember a lot of what was going on because again, it was a big change for sure. But I think in my kid brain, I was like, oh, just it's just like anyone else who moves. So in
So
a way, I think that was good for me as a kid because, I'm sure it was like really stressful for my family to go through all of that. But for me, new friends in school, new people to play with, good stuff when you're 4 years old.
yeah, that's great. That's great. So did you ever like experience like any hardships making friends just because of like language barrier or culture shock or anything?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't have like a full grasp on the language yet, that's for sure. Um, I feel like it wasn't really until I had gotten to maybe like first grade, it's like a year, 2 years later, where I felt more comfortable talking to people and conversing. I was probably pretty quiet when I was a kid, just trying to absorb the language. And kids talk so fast and they say words wrong too. So you're trying to make sense of all this information, and can get kind of you can get kind of jumbled in your brain sometimes. So I'm sure I was pretty quiet when I was a kid.
Yeah, definitely. That's really understandable. And then once you kind of got to Boston, did you stay in that city until moving to Rice later, or did you ever move around on the East Coast?
So my family moved one more time. We moved to a small town called Niskuna, New York. It's where GE Global Research is actually. We moved there between kindergarten and first grade for me. And that's the town I stayed in all the way until I came to Rice. So from when I was basically 6 till 17, 18.
Okay, got it. And so can you kind of describe what life was like for you, after the move?
Yeah. So, my family was lower income growing up for a chunk of time. We moved around different apartments around in the Skeena area, surrounding areas. Um, and for a long time, I just thought like that's how small houses were in the US because like all you know is apartments in Boston. All I knew was apartments. But like it's kind of cool growing up in apartments because like there are a lot of kids there as well. Like there's a playground that the apartment puts together. Like your parents don't have to put together a playground for you in the backyard, and so you meet a lot of kids that way. A lot of playing like wiffle ball, throwing a football around, playing video games, playing Legos, like kid stuff. And that was kind of cool environment to grow up in around like until I was 10. So we moved to a house between fifth grade and sixth grade to me, and we lived in that house until I graduated high school.
Okay, awesome. Got it. And so was that where you kind of got your first job? I know you mentioned working as a lifeguard. Do you mind talking a
Mhm.
little bit about that experience?
Yeah, yeah. So I think the precursor to getting that job is swimming was a huge part of my life, like competitive swimming. I started competitively swimming when I was 7 years old. So I got put in swim lessons pretty early on in life. And then I basically finished all of the lessons at the YMCA. And so like the next logical step is to do the swim team after that. And so that's how I got started when I was really young. Swam competitively, did club swimming, varsity swimming. And so when you're in that environment, you spend a lot of time in the pool. People can get jobs at the pool. So when I was younger in high school, like freshman year, like a lot of the upperclassmen on the team were lifeguards. It's a good way to make money. I mean, it's not a super high effort, like you're not doing manual labor. You're sitting on a chair watching people swim, and you can work after practice, which is really nice, or you can work before practice, work during like your study periods in high school, which is really convenient. Um, and so I just got a job lifeguarding at the pool that I swam in like pretty much every single day. Like I was in that pool like 15 plus hours a week.
Wow, wow, yeah. And so swimming, was that something that you really enjoyed personally? Was that something that you took a lot of pleasure in, or was just something that just gradually became part of your routine, or was it something that you're forced into?
I think when I was younger, I didn't love it because I had to do it so much. Um, but as I kind of I really loved swimming. I guess is the bottom line. Like being part of a team, competing, being in practice with your teammates, like all that bonding. Like I think it was just a really, really good experience for me. I think it's a place where I learned a lot about like failure, about setbacks, about things that aren't in your control, or like, how working really hard at something you can achieve a goal as well. Like there's just and like things like leadership. Like I was the captain of the varsity swim team, and having to manage all of that at a pretty young age, I think was really important to me and really shaped like the kind of person I was by the time I got to college.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine having sports being such an integral part of your life would definitely have a pretty big impact on who you are. Yeah. Do you have any maybe like exceptional stories or anything during your time as a lifeguard? Did you ever have like your hero moment or just anything
Uh,
funny or anything that you just recall standing out?
so I think like I don't know if anyone, for people who don't know what lifeguarding is like, it's a pretty boring job. Like I said, like you're just watching people swim. I think the most eventful day I had lifeguarding was the my very first day lifeguarding. I was like kind of nervous. I think I had swim practice like before my first shift. So I went home, ate dinner real quick, and then went back. I think I biked back to the pool because I was within biking distance of the pool. Very convenient. But anyways, I show up and like swim practice is still going on, but like for other age groups, and everyone's out of the pool. And I'm like, what is going on? I thought I was just going to show up, watch some kids swim, and go home. And I guess some poor kid had thrown up in the pool. And so, the people managing the swim team are trying to figure out what's going on. We, the lifeguards, are like, well, I guess we got to call someone to come clean it up because it's like really gross. I'm not going to get into graphic detail, but it was really gross. I've seen a lot of kids throw up in the pool, but that was among the worst. And so for some unknown reason, we thought it was a smart idea to try to start scooping it out of the pool, which is, again, a terrible idea. There are people whose jobs it is to do this, and they do it very well.
Right.
Some high schoolers trying to put together a raft made out of the different pool supplies is not the best way to do this. But we wanted to do it because I guess we were bored, something else to do. Don't want to talk to parents for that long. So we got some of the floating rescue boards and put them together, made a raft, and we put a mat over it. And we took turns just kind of pushing ourselves into the middle of the pool with like this big long scoop, and we just scooping stuff and like turning it over into the trash can. This was extremely ineffective. We did this for probably about like half an hour before we decided this is a complete waste of time. At that point, the custodial staff probably arrived, looked at us and said, what are you doing? Like, this is such a terrible idea. And then our job just transitioned to just getting people out of the locker rooms and just shutting down the pool.
Wow, yeah, for sure. That definitely sounds like quite the first experience as a lifeguard. All right, perfect. Is there anything else you kind of want to share about your more early stages of your life before we move on?
Let's see. Yeah, I guess I just want to emphasize like something really was important to me. I think like that's like where my main community was growing up. Really like came to have a real love of like working like on a team and like striving towards a goal. I think that was something that was really, really important to me.
Yeah, definitely. I can see you seem to have a lot of passion for swimming even now. Okay, moving on then. I see that you earned your BS in bioengineering from Rice.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering how you decided to attend Rice since it's so far from the East Coast.
Yeah, so Rice definitely was not like one of the first school, like not like at the top choice when I was first looking at schools. At the time I was looking at schools like MIT, where close to where I'd lived previously, and other like big schools in the East Coast like Duke University, Johns Hopkins University. Um, I really only had Rice on my radar because I have a great aunt and great uncle who still currently live in Houston. And we were just visiting them, and they're like, you should probably take a tour of Rice, walk around the campus. I mean, the campus was beautiful, is beautiful. I had a really great tour guide, really excited about Rice. And I think she was good at kind of showing us like what the residential college system was like how close knit the communities can be and all the different opportunities you have at Rice. So I think that really shot Rice up my like internal rankings. And I think as fate would have it, I got waitlisted at basically every single school that was above Rice. And I was like bummed, like growing up, I had always gotten good grades and you kind of follow this formula, like, you work hard, you study hard, you get good test grades, you get good final grades. And so that should get you into a good school, like any school you want, which is obviously not true. That's not how college applications work, but that's kind of what you're fed because, you want to work hard, continuously work hard. No one wants to tell you that is kind of random at times, but Rice basically was the highest ranked school that had accepted me. And I think I was in this semi-rebellious, like individualistic streak around when I was making these decisions. I was like, screw it. Like I'm not anyone's second choice. Like I'm gonna go somewhere that wants me. So signed the acceptance to Rice.
No, yeah, definitely. That's so understandable. Can you just describe some of your overall undergraduate experience at Rice or like some defining moments maybe that you had?
Yeah. I mean, it was just such a great experience for me. I was at Baker College, and freshman year at Baker College, I met my now wife. I met my roommate freshman year was my best man at my wedding, and I'm counting, at least three other groomsmen I met my freshman year at Baker too. So, like made some really close friendships and relationships early on. It was just an amazing support structure. Moving kind of far away from home can be challenging. Like, I didn't really have like my high school friends like close by anymore. Like visiting gets difficult. New environment too. And like for everyone, not just me, like college is a tough transition. So trying to have that support system early on, I think I just had an exceptionally strong support system from the get-go here, right? So I think that was really important because, I was majoring in bioengineering, which it's a difficult major for sure. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of like responsibilities like outside of class too, in terms of like clubs and if you're involved in the college system, like you can get overloaded pretty quickly. So it's kind of good to have like a group of people you can kind of take a step back, take a breather, and like kind of get some perspective on.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned bioengineering. Why did you decide to study bioengineering? Did you ever like consider any other fields or subjects, or like what was kind of like, did you have an encounter or an experience that really shaped your, desire to study that particular field?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had always been good at math and science growing up. Like, I think my brain's like pretty analytical. Math comes not super easily to me, but like I think easier than like an average learner for sure. And so that allowed me to kind of see where math belongs in other fields like biology. And I just really like tinkering with things. Like I like prototyping on something. Like growing up, I played with a lot of Legos, like very like physical skill set growing up, because I eventually turned into like just mess around with tools. Like when I was in high school, I worked on Science Olympiad, and I'd worked on a lot of the more like building type events. Like you make like Rube Goldberg machines, you make like little vehicles. And so, coming to college, I wanted to continue doing like something in the math science area, but also still have that freedom to, design things, work with my hands. And I feel like bioengineering was a really good major for that.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, it sounds like from a pretty early age in high school, you knew that's kind of like the field you wanted to go into. Yeah. I see that you were involved at a couple of like campus organizations at Rice, including Rice University Splash and then the Biomedical Engineering Society. So what kind of work did you do in those groups, and like what kind of inspired you to join and eventually lead those programs?
Yeah, so I'll start with Splash because I think I spent a lot more time in Splash. So I know Splash still exists now. I don't know what direction that club has gone in since I've left Rice, but when I was there, um, we were trying to create an educational program for middle schoolers to high schoolers from low income schools. And we wanted to put on basically a day of fun classes for them to take that were taught by Rice students. And these were going to be just really quick, like 1 hour classes. We tried to give our student teachers like as much equipment, supplies as possible so they could make it fun and interactive. And while I was at Rice Splash, I worked with two just really amazing women, Bailey and Catherine at the time, and they had been there before I had gotten there, and one of their goals was to expand the program. So I jumped on like as they were talking about going from about 200 students to almost 1,000 students, bringing those students onto campus. And so when I joined, like it was a lot of, trying to manage like more teachers, more classes, more supplies, and also like trying to coordinate more buses, more schools, more parent chaperones, more activities for students to do beyond just the classes too. So it was really fun. It was a lot of work because it was like, expansion is always kind of a tricky thing to do because sometimes you can expand too quickly and kind of you have gaps in between. But it was really, really fun. I mean, not to sound too corny, but like it is so rewarding to see like the look on kids' faces when they like take a really fun class or they see the campus for the first time, how beautiful it is. They get to walk around like they're like a college student for the first time. So they kind of like that freedom, even though we just really restricted them to the academic quad. But yeah, it was just really, really fun. Just trying to put this one day together, and then on the day you just go all out. Like there's all these events, and it's just a really, really good time, I think, for the visiting students.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think this like kind of shaped your desire to come back and teach at Rice later?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, I think I have a lot of experience that shaped my desire to teach, but I think one thing that Rice Splash really showed me is like how rewarding like the purity of teaching is. Like it doesn't matter what you're like now I teach bioengineering, but it's like teaching like the statistics of sport or forensics or like, how does a YouTube video actually work? Like small things like that, like kind of itching at students like curiosity about the world and seeing their eyes just absolutely light up. Like that's a feeling I hope everyone gets to experience at some time. Like teaching something new to someone who was curious about it and just seeing them like respond to like the learning process is just amazing.
Yeah, I think you described that in a really beautiful way. Yeah, and then did you want to talk about the Biomedical Engineering Society?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, well, it's been years, so I guess I can say this. I kind of got pressured into joining BMES. I had a classmate to here at the time. He was the president, and I think he was running unopposed for president. We all kind of knew that he was going to be president, and but like he was trying to fill out like his team, and he wanted someone to be historian slash kind of like a jack of all trades board member who could like help run different events. And he told me that the hourly commitment was going to be less than an hour a week, and it ended up being like 3 hours a week at
Uh,
least, like planning events. But it was fun. I mean, it's good to. I think it's important to give back to your academic community for sure. One thing I did with BMES was I helped work with the mentorship program that we had at the time. I think it still does exist, where you pair upperclassmen with like freshmen and sophomores. And it's just a kind of a good buddy system to get, our freshmen and sophomores acquainted with the program, have someone they can go to ask about classes, is BioE the right major for me? Just like, things like that, just like more faces that you can recognize within the major. And so being able to manage that, because, when I was a mentor, and like seeing like how much work is on the other side like gave me a lot more appreciation for like all the other events that also go on with BMES too. And so that it was good. Like I don't want to come off like I was complaining about having to do it. I did kind of have to get roped into it, but I do think that's like important work to do within your major.
yeah, definitely. I think that's such a wonderful program that you guys have set up. Um, but yeah, I see you also worked as a research volunteer and like also did some undergraduate research work. So what kind of research, I guess, did you do, and why did you decide to get involved in research?
Yeah, so research is I want to get involved in research. So I had done a little bit of research in high school, but I'd only really scratched the surface of it. I was running like really simple experiments, and I had like grad students basically telling me what to do. But I could kind of see like, once you get trained and you get really involved in a research lab, you have a lot of flexibility to design experiments and, make your own conclusions about, your findings. And I think that's just such a cool part of science, like kind of knocking on the door of like something new that no one's ever done before. And so, with all the plethora of Rice's research opportunities, I thought I'd just get started. And the place where I got started was with Dr. Dan Wagner, working with zebrafish, because I wanted to I was trying to dip my toes into like tissue engineering, genetic engineering, CRISPR stuff going on. And I had a great grad student. His name was Tom, super like outgoing, friendly guy, really did his best to get me involved in a bunch of different projects, really pushed me to become independent. And so for a while, like I was starting to manage some of my own experiments. But it's also around that time I realized like I don't really like working with a pipette. I don't like working on a lab bench so much. And so I had to have a conversation with my advisor, Dan, about this. And he was super, super nice about it. He was like, obviously, like not every student that he mentors is going to go on to become like a genetic engineer and work like in his lab or in a similar field. And so he was super understanding when I wanted to move to a different lab. So I moved so Dan Wagner, he still works at Rice. He's in ABL, but I moved off campus then to do research at MD Anderson. I was working for Dr. Richard Bouchard. And I got pretty lucky, honestly, with this position because I had just taken a class where you learn this software called LabVIEW. And my instructor at the time, Dr. Renato Ramos, was basically like, there's this lab with some openings. If I've recommended you because you're good at LabVIEW or like you're good enough at LabVIEW, and why don't you try this out? And so I jumped on the opportunity, and that was a lot more of like the software programming, machine components and like signal processing side too, because we were working in like a medical imaging lab. And that's where I felt like I had really found my place. Like it was a good intersection of like my desire to do research, but also like my skill set. And there was no like pipetting or like benchtop stuff. It was a lot of like programming, a lot of working with like equipment. So a lot more like on the engineering side than the biology side, which I realized I preferred a lot more. So I worked with Richard for the summer before my senior year and then all the way through senior year. He was really generous to like keep me on during the school year and pay me for my time. I know sometimes a lot of students do research for credit, but getting paid is a pretty nice alternative to that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's so cool to see how you kind of discovered what you enjoyed doing. Yeah. And how do you think these experiences kind of influence your decision to like continue pursuing academia in your career?
So I think I was starting to form the idea of teaching when I was an undergrad. Maybe I had not like said it out loud to myself yet, but I was like, oh, that could be like a cool thing to do. And like a lot of my role models in undergrad were teachers. They're the professors that I was taking classes with, and I could see like how much care they put into the classes and how much they thought about students. And sometimes I'd be surprised, like, how do you know my name? Like I've never like introduced myself to you, but clearly like you care enough to learn students' names, like, when we're not in class. It's like stuff like that makes you realize like, oh yeah, like people in this field really care about students and learning, and maybe that's something I could think about down the road. So I was like definitely leaning towards academia. And I think basically to teach at university, you need a PhD. So you have to go to grad school. And I was pretty vocal with Richard, my PI at MD Anderson, about wanting to go to grad school. And he was an amazing advisor. He worked with me to figure out like where I want to go to grad school, what field of research I wanted to go into. And then he just like started flexing like his connections and just really, really working hard to, put me in touch with people that he felt like I should be talking to. And honestly, that helped so much. I mean, navigating grad school can be really difficult because there's no set like list of things you have to do. Like, Rice's OAA is amazing for a lot of things, especially for pre-med, but because grad school is so nebulous, it's hard to put together like here's a complete list of to-dos, because it does look different from field to field. How much you talk to people ahead of time or who you even contact changes from field to field too. So Richard really helped me with that. And so funny enough, I end up applying to Duke, where Richard had done grad school, and eventually I went to the lab where he had done his own PhD.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. It sounds like you had a really, really great mentor during your time doing research. Yeah, perfect pivot to kind of your grad school experience. But before that, is there anything else you want to share about Rice or your undergrad experience that you didn't get a chance to talk about?
Um, Let me think. I don't think so. I think if we're going to circle back to what I do now, we'll get back to Rice.
Okay, perfect. So I see that you earned both your master's and PhD from Duke's Pratt School of Engineering. So why did you? I know you kind of touched on this earlier, but why did you just like choose to attend Duke specifically for your higher education?
Yeah, I mean, so Richard was pitching Duke pretty hard because he is a Duke alum. But one thing he really got in my head about, is that the right expression? The one thing that he really tried to get me to think about was, when you go to grad school, like there will be a lot of really good science to do, and you'll meet a lot of very cool people at almost any grad school. But the one thing that can really shape your grad school experience is your advisor. Like, is your advisor a genuinely good person? Like, will they understand if you need to take time off? Will they understand if you just can't meet a certain deadline? Or will they be flexible with you on like how much work you need to get done when it comes to like classes and personal commitments? Because, now that I've been through grad school, there's a really wide spectrum of how good your advisor can be. Like, there are some straight up bad advisors in the world who will basically say, I don't care about your personal life. You're going to work 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week for me, just like in the lab nonstop. Like that's the labs you hear about, like, oh, they keep a cot in their grad student office because you just have to sleep there some nights. Or the people who like have no personal life, like they don't even get to explore the city that they're in because they're just always working. Like, that's just not a great situation. And so Richard was telling me about this guy at Duke, Greg Trahey, who became my advisor, who is just, I mean, Greg is just an amazing guy. He's super understanding about how much you can, like, I guess, how valuable life outside a lab is. Like, he's big into travel, for example. Like when we have international conferences, look, the NIH is already paying for your plane ticket to go overseas. It doesn't cost the NIH more money if you extend your trip a week on the plane ticket. You have to pay for your own lodging if you extend the trip a week. So he's like, why don't you just go travel for a little bit? And I think, that kind of stuff, which is completely unrelated to science, completely unrelated to publishing papers, kind of shows that your advisor's invested in you, yes, scientifically, but also like personally, because you're going to spend 5, 6, 7 years in the lab and you're going to grow a lot in that time. And I think advisors who kind of take on the role of like, really being a good boss, being a good mentor, and being a good influence on you during that time, I think can really make your experience that much better. And so, Richard had talked a lot about Greg, and I was like, yeah, like from interviews and talking to Greg, like I felt like he was a really good person to work for, and I ended up being proven very, very right.
Wow, yeah, that's great. I'm glad you're able to find another really great mentor to continue with you throughout your graduate experience. And yeah, do you think you can describe just basically how graduate life was for you at Duke and like some important moments that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think so. Moving to Duke is in Durham, North Carolina. It's a lot smaller of a city than Houston. So the grad students tend to have like their favorite spots to go to, which is kind of fun. Like the program I was in was like a very social program. I would say like people like to go out, and even like later, like as you kind of are on the tail end of grad school, it's kind of easy to kind of separate yourself from the group because you're really focusing on trying to get your PhD done, but people still remain like pretty social, which is great. I had a great group of friends who are all in the program as well. And so it's kind of nice to have, again, like another good community, a good support system while I was there. Academically, like on the research side, it was super, super fulfilling. I mean, Greg, one of the great things about Greg as an advisor, he's super hands off. He's never like, oh, have this report or this analysis done to me by this time. He's like, it kind of gets done when it gets done. So you do have to be kind of a self-starter. You have to set your own internal deadlines to make sure the research is going. But that level of flexibility for me is really good. I don't like working on anyone else's timeline except for my own. I know it's a very like arrogant thing to say, but that's just how that's when I do my best work. But I also had a really supportive lab. Like I remember early on, like I just asked so many dumb questions. like just like just an infinite slew of dumb questions to the senior grad students, but they were all just like super understanding, really patient with me, took time to like kind of walk me through like the whole question. And never really made me feel like I was like new or dumb. Like I think one of the cool things about our atmosphere was like everyone was treated equally. Like from day one, like Greg would pull you into his office and he would treat you the same as like a 6-year grad student. And that was just kind of cool. Like it kind of showed you like this is how good science is done. Like when you're treated with respect, when you're like when people take time to explain things to you, but also like give you like the confidence to, just seek out answers on your own too. And
Yeah.
I haven't even talked about what we did. We were doing research in ultrasound, medical ultrasound, and a lot of our lab is centered around the idea of how can we make images look better using existing data. So a lot of medical imaging, like the way you make it better is you introduce more expensive equipment. You introduce a new material that is more sensitive to radiation, sound, whatever it is. But we were asking the question of, well, we have all this information that we can get from our sensors already. Is there a different way to process it to make our images look better?
Wow, yeah, that sounds really cool. Um, and I see like was that related to like the multiple fellowships that you had while you were at Duke, or did you do different work in those as well?
They're all related. I was fortunate to join the lab when like a lot of projects were going on, and so I was given my own project pretty early on, and being able to be independent, really push and get a lot of research done in your first year, 2 years of grad school, I guess must have been impressive to somebody because I got a couple of fellowships, including the NSF, which I was really proud of at the time. And yeah, I think I guess like bottom line, like I got pretty lucky with grad school, like good advisor, good momentum on projects. And, I worked hard too. Like I don't want to like be totally self-deprecating to like the work I put in, but I think it was just a really good situation where I showed up, I was ready to work. I was ready to be receptive to like new ideas. And also like everyone was like supporting me throughout the whole journey.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. Do you mind elaborating a little bit more on like your certificate in college teaching? I see that you received that while you were at Duke. So like what was the process like to get that and why did you choose to pursue it?
Yeah. So again, like I had been forming the idea of wanting to teach, and it was really like later on when I was talking to a professor at Duke, Ann Satterback, who actually was at Rice when I was at Rice. Like she was teaching the bioengineering department. We both moved to Duke at the same time for different reasons. But because I had known her from Rice, like just a friendly face to talk to when you're starting out grad school, and especially like having like a professor who's like supporting you beyond your advisor is good too. And so I TA'd for Dr. Satterback several times, and she was like, hey, if you're serious about a career in teaching, like you should start kind of formalizing your career, your experiences in education. And so she really pushed me to get the certificate, and it was really helpful to kind of see like there's teaching and there's pedagogy, which is like the study of teaching. Like look, when you're in a class and your professor asks you to work in a team to answer this question, like that's active learning, and that has all this literature proving why that's a better way to teach than just droning on from a PowerPoint presentation. So things like that, like really learning like the jargon of pedagogy, but also seeing it in practice. And I think one of the cool things about that certificate was it was for all programs, not just engineering or not just bioengineering. So I had people in my classes in these teaching classes who were in economics, music, English, there's a group of history folks, kinesiology, like all these different fields, and seeing how one teaching technique could be applied to like a bunch of different types of lectures, whether it's like a discussion about a book in English class versus like a lecture on math and bioengineering. You can apply like pretty similar techniques. And I think one thing that was really cool about the certificate program was they had this thing called teaching triangles, where another student comes and observes you teaching and you go and observe them. And it's just kind of an exchange of ideas. And so I had a student in English come and observe me when I was teaching stats at Duke at the time, and just kind of hearing her comments about like, oh, like I really like the way you did this, because for me, like I don't like math, but like this was a really intuitive way to do it. Versus, or in other comments, like I can tell that you're really good at math. because you explained it this way, but that's not going to work for someone who doesn't really like math or understand math. And, that was just like a really cool way to mix ideas.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think this kind of like shaped the way you teach now or kind of the outlook you have on teaching?
For sure. Yeah. I think kind of seeing how people from other departments approach teaching makes me realize, teaching is not just about making sure you remember the equation or you remember these facts. It's about like the actual learning. How do you get a student to not just be able to regurgitate information, but really like understand it and apply it somewhere else? Seeing that applied in other departments, other fields really showed me like new techniques to help students with that. So I incorporate a lot more analogies now in my teaching. I incorporate a lot of active learning, a lot of like, have students design something. So they're actually working with their hands or like working with a team to do something that doesn't necessarily have to have like a set answer to it. I just need you to just work with your hands a little bit here.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. And then I know you mentioned TAing a little bit, but looking at your resume, I see you received an award for Teaching Assistant of the Year in Biomedical Engineering in 2020. Congratulations, very late.
Oh, thank you.
Seems really prestigious. And so what do you think contributed to you getting that award? And like, how did it make you feel getting that?
Um, Felt good to get the award, that's for sure. I've been TAing, I think that was my second semester TAing, and I think I they didn't tell me exactly why I won it. I think I had won it because that's when I started to develop my own course materials. Dr. Satterback, after TAing her for the first time, like she gave me a lot more leeway because she was like, well, you basically took this class when you were at Rice. You've TA'd for me once already now. Like, where do you think we could be doing better in this class? And we had designed, it's in teaching, it's called like scaffolding. You basically help students work through a problem, and kind of show them like all the different steps of the problem solving process before then you give them the full problem and you don't help them at all. So you scaffold, you show them like the loose framework for how to tackle this, and then you have them practice it again later. So we designed the scaffolding, we designed a series of exercises to help students solve complex like molecular modeling in bioengineering. And it seemed to have worked pretty well. Like we didn't do a ton of analysis on the results, but we generally felt that like the presentations were higher quality, the mathematical models were higher quality. And I think Anne had kind of joked that she had recommended me the first time I TA'd for her, and she just was like, oh, I just need to make the letter better, I guess. And so the second time worked for her.
Wow, yeah, that is so impressive. Do you think like receiving this award had any impact on like your career or the confidence you had in your own teaching abilities?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think it was really great to be validated for like the work I'd put in, and the idea that, hey, not only do I enjoy doing this, like I guess I'm pretty good at it. At least like some people think I'm good at this, and so it's like worthwhile to keep pursuing. Like I think it was good for me to kind of see, hey, you might be good at something you really, really like. Not everyone gets that in a job. And being recognized for that, I think, gave me a lot of motivation to just really take this as a serious career option.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to see that you had that kind of outside push and validation for you to continue along this path. That's all the questions I've prepared about your graduate experience. But before we move on, is there anything else you want to touch on or share?
Um, I guess I got a dog when I was in grad school, and that was like a really, really great move. So to all the struggling grad students out there, a dog will, if you have time for it and the money to feed it, your dog gets you out of bed on the bad days, gives you someone who is always happy to see you, does a lot for your mental health. So I'm very pro dog.
Oh wow, yeah, that must be such a cool experience having a dog as a grad student. Okay, moving on. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears you kind of bypassed the transition of like a postdoc and then just came, straight to Rice after getting your PhD from Duke. And so, what kind of motivated you to make that exact decision? And what was the process like deciding to come to that decision?
Yeah, so postdocs are typically research positions. And towards the end of grad school, I was pretty set on not doing research. I was like, I think I like teaching so much more than research. It's not that I hate research, but if I'm going to do teaching seriously, I think I want to do it like 100%. So that's why I chose not to do a postdoc. I know that they're like teaching postdoc positions, but I figured, first time applying to jobs in this cycle, why not just see what's out there, start applying to jobs. And um, I'm trying to remember the whole part. And then like you said, what motivated me to like seek out this position.
Yeah.
So starting out, so Rice was not one of the first schools I applied to because they hadn't opened the position yet. I'll keep the schools anonymized. But I had applied to a school out west, and I had a really good experience interviewing for them. I think I had done a lot better than I thought I was going to, despite the fact that I was like really like preparing my materials on the fly. I was practicing my interview like the day before because I was still trying to finish my PhD. So I was like busy with research. I was also still teaching a class at the time. So I had so much going on outside of just the job search. But even with everything going on, like I had done a lot better than I thought I would. And so I was like, oh, like I think I should take this like really seriously. Like I think I can get a job in this cycle instead of, having like an extra postdoc year or like an internship year or whatever. So I applied to a couple more schools. I think I did pretty well in the interviews, didn't get all the jobs, obviously. But then Rice opened the position and I was like, oh, this is like really, really cool because I know their program really, really well. I know the classes really, really well. Like, I think I could do a really good job at this. And that's kind of a big thing to me. Like, there are some places I apply to, and I just like, I didn't get the best feeling that I could do a good job. And I think I'm like, maybe it's like pride, but like, I only like doing something I feel like I can do a good job at it. Or if I can work on it, I can eventually become good at it. And Rice was a place where I was like, I think I could become really, really good at this job. I have this familiarity, I have this motivation, I have the skill set in the areas that they need. Like, I think this is a great situation for me. So I interviewed, and it's just kind of funny because when I talk to my coworkers now, they're like, oh yeah, we really hope that you were coming. Like, we really want to try to make it like nice for you, like on your visit. And I was like, wow, like I really hope they like me. Like, I hope they give me the job. So it's just kind of funny, like hearing like the two different sides, but it ended up working really well. I obviously got the job and I'm here now. And now I'm teaching classes that I taught when I was an undergrad, or sorry, I'm teaching classes that I took when I was an undergrad, which is a really, really funny experience because like when my students get to something that's difficult, I'm like, yeah, I remember struggling on this too. And, I try not to tell them like, oh yeah, like I totally failed that test or I totally like bombed this assignment. But I do think like, having gone through the process myself, like it allows me to kind of see what are the parts in the classes that are not really that important, or so I can cut those, or hey, this wasn't explained super well, so maybe I can like take twice as long to explain this, or introduce more assignments or activities. So this point is like helps students learn a little bit better. And so, even though I've only finished my first year on the job, I feel like I have been thinking about doing a job like this for years now, because you don't really forget your undergraduate experience. You don't forget the things that you liked and didn't like. And those ideas were always kicking around in my head, like all the way through grad school. So now actually being here, getting to act on like the improvements I always wanted to make is, I think, it's really fun. It's a unique situation and I'm glad to be in it.
Wow, yeah, it's really cool seeing how you were able to use your undergraduate experiences and kind of shape the things you teach now. And how have you kind of seen like Rice change throughout the years? I guess going from a student now teaching here.
Well, there's a new Sid. That's weird for me to look at. And I guess there's a new Hansen too. That's weird for me to also look at, although I don't spend that much time on main campus. Other than that, I mean, Rice students will always be Rice students. Y'all are quirky, smart, inquisitive. There's like a lingo you have to talk to Rice students with that doesn't really exist at other schools. Like I taught at Duke, and they just I don't know really how to describe it. Rice students just talk a little bit different. They're like a little bit nerdy. They're a little bit like they love the residential colleges. Like there's a couple of traditions at Rice that I think if you want to be the best teacher possible, you have to respect things like beer bike. Like you can't be that professor that assigns that has a test the Monday after beer bike if you want your students to buy in and feel like your professor cares about you. So like it's like really small things like that. One thing I'm grateful for is that the bioengineering department built a brand new teaching lab space. So when I was here, a lot of our labs were in the basement of Ryan Lab, which is it's a fine space. I don't mean to diss Ryan Lab, but you're in a basement. There's no natural light. Whereas like this new space in the BRC it's like beautiful, overlooks Main Street, like out towards the medical center. All the equipment is new. We just got new computers. So I'm grateful to be in a space that's like state of the art. Really gives me a lot of flexibility as to like what I can do. I just got an email from the IT department. We just installed new computers, new software. I'm excited to go back into the lab and just like kind of play around with the software, see what's new, see what I have to fix, see what new possibilities there are. And so having all these new resources really like sky's the limit when it comes to what you want to do in the classroom. I don't know if that would have existed when I was a student here at Rice, but I'm grateful that things are always getting better for our department.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's great to hear. And I know you've only been at Rice like and not too long. But do you think like the kind of roles that you've been assuming has evolved at all throughout your time here at Rice?
What do you mean by that?
Just like the kind of work you do, and I guess like what you spend the majority of your time working on.
Yeah. I think one thing that I guess surprised me is that there's a lot more time spent doing things that aren't just teaching. Like I think there's I don't know if students know a ton about this, but like for me at least, like over 50% of my time is not spent in the classroom. It's spent either, not even just grading, like preparing for next semester, thinking about like future classes, developing new classes, attending like department meetings, committee meetings, advising students. Like there's more than just like sitting in front of students and teaching them something. Like there's like a lot of different parts to being, a good teaching faculty. And I've learned that really like makes the experience that much better, because I do like teaching. I do like being in front of students. I like, students give me a lot of energy when I'm around them because they're excited or they have funny stories, all this kind of stuff. But then there's a lot of important work behind the scenes that goes on too. And I think taking part in that like has just as much impact as whatever you do in the classroom as well. And another thing that was really cool to me, I just went to my first teaching conference earlier this summer, and being able to learn from, I spoke about, in the certificate for teaching program at Duke, like you were learning from different departments. Well, at this teaching conference, you're learning still within like bioengineering, but from different schools across the country. So sometimes, we have our class here. How do people at other schools with the pretty much exact same class, how do they teach it? Do they have different homework assignments, different exams, different projects? It's just really cool to just pick the brains of these people who have been, working and really good at what they do for sometimes decades, and learning from that is a really cool experience too. So, I think teaching is one of those skills that you can always just keep improving, and there's like almost like infinite resources to do that with, and that's a really cool part of my job, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's great to hear about, all the things you've been working on. Um, and kind of pivoting off of that, what would you say like a day in your life looks like, I guess, on an average day in the semester?
Yeah. So kind of the fun thing about working in academia is that it's not like a typical 9 to 5 job. Like you don't have to clock in at 9, you don't have to clock out at 5. So I'll take one day from last fall semester. So I was only teaching one class at the time. It was a 3-hour lab class. So let's say it's like Monday. I don't have to be at Rice by 9 or 8 or 10 or whatever. Like really, I only have to be there before 1 o'clock, which is when the class starts, which means I can do emails from home. I can, work out at home before. I can, if I'm doing any kind of prep work for future semesters, or if I'm putting together any kind of documents, I can do all of that from home. So the benefits are I get to work from home like a decent chunk of time, which is really nice. And then I can avoid the morning rush hour traffic, which is also really nice. But I usually try to show up at Rice before 11 o'clock. I would say like I don't want to get there like too late. Like I don't want to cut it too close before my class. That gives me time to, have lunch on like a more leisurely schedule. I can eat in my office while I do more work, more grading. I can show up to the lab pretty early, get equipment ready for students. If there's like a piece of broken equipment or machinery that a student was talking about like in the previous week or previous class, I have time to kind of work on that too. And then class starts. Like I said, it's a 3-hour lab class. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer depending on how long students take to complete all the different activities. And then after that, sometimes students like to chat after class if they have questions about like applying to grad school or classes, or what kind of elective should I take. Sometimes those meetings happen after class. And then I go home. Usually, yeah, dinner, walking my dog, and spending time with my wife. I think just kind of the nice thing about like the life of an academic is that we work hard. I would say like there's a lot of things to do, but you kind of plan like when all of that work can happen. And so if you want to take part of the evening off and you can get the work done later, you can watch a show. You can watch MasterChef with your wife instead of like worrying about like, oh, I have to be at the office at this time, or you can walk your dog, or you can take your time in the morning. So I really like the academic lifestyle.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like there's a lot of really great flexibility you get with a job in academia. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, can you share just a little bit about like what you find most enjoyable or rewarding about your work?
Yeah. I kind of like hinted at like, like this the joy you can see sometimes in students when they learn something new. Or, one of my personal goals when I teach is like if a student says like, oh, I'm not good at this, or I'll never be able to learn this. And then by the end of the semester, they're like, oh yeah, like I did learn that. Or like I never thought I could teach myself these things. Or I knew nothing about this, and now like I feel confident that I can do XYZ now. Like that's really rewarding, because I have this, I'm kind of early in my career, so maybe it's a naive belief, but I think students are capable of a lot more than they think they are. And the reason why they think they might not be able to do certain things is because you didn't have maybe a good math teacher, for example. Like math is frequently cited as like one of the biggest barriers to a lot of future careers, because a lot of math teachers don't necessarily instill joy or wonder in math. It's just like numbers, equations, plug and chug, all that stuff. And that's not really all that fun. But and like personally, I don't think math is all that fun either. But once you see like what you can do with math, like the future applications, like in my case, like molecular modeling in the class that I TA'd, or things like that. I think then you can motivate students a lot more and get them to see like just doing plug and chug is not the end goal here. Just memorizing all these math rules is not the end goal. And then that's when you start to unlock more of the possibilities in learning. So I'm teaching a new class next semester. It's called Transport Phenomena, and it's a very mathy class. I think it's going to be a fun challenge for me to get students to see like, see beyond the math, beyond all the differential equations. Like, why do we do all of this? And kind of see them as like math is a useful tool. You don't have to love it, but it can help you do a lot of things that you will love.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a beautiful way to word it. And I think that perfectly segues into, our next question of what are some important traits you think are of being like a really good teacher?
I think empathy, like being able to meet students where they are, being able to understand that like they're learning something for the first time. And whenever you learn something for the first time, you're never going to be perfect at it or even like good at it. And so I try to, as much as I'm influenced by really good teachers I've had, I'm also influenced by really bad teachers I've had. Teachers who think like, oh, well, this equation is obvious. Obviously you would do this. Obviously you do X, Y, Z. It's like, no, it's not obvious, because I just opened the textbook for the first time, or. And so, really trying to meet students where they're at, understanding like all the struggles that they go through, understanding that, again, like Monday after beer bike is not the best time to have an exam, being cognizant of like students are here to learn. That is for sure. Like Rice is a competitive school. Rice is a really hard school to get into. And so you did a lot of work to get here, and you've proven a lot about yourself just by being at Rice. That being said, like if all you did at Rice was just take classes, you wouldn't be getting all that you could out of the Rice experience. So being cognizant of the fact that like students are, maybe they're club presidents or they're on club sports teams. They maybe just want to play powder puff with their friends, like that's also like important parts of the Rice experience. And so when you look back, like a lot of schools like to talk like, well, when alumni look back at our school, like, what did they get out of it? And it's like, yes, like education is very important. I don't mean to like make it seem like it's any less important than it should be, but people also remember the residential college system. People also remember winning a powder puff game. I keep bringing up powder puff because I coached powder puff at Rice, and that was like really fun. But like it's like small silly things like that students want to spend time on, and it breaks up their day and it makes them, I think, more rounded of people. If you can understand that, then you can understand why you can't put everything you want into a class. You can't give out a bazillion homework assignments and make them study all the time. And then it makes you a lot more selective of a teacher. And really, and I think that kind of empathy, I think it hones your teaching skills. Like it allows you to see, like, here's a hierarchy of like the different things that a student could learn in my class. Now, what are the most important things? And let's focus on those.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's empathy and understanding is so important for us students. Yeah, and I see you joined the Rice faculty, pretty recently. So how would you say you envision kind of building up your career and kind of the work that you do here?
Yeah, I think I I guess like the short answer is like I don't know 100% because I'm so new to everything. I think my bottom line, like my goal is to be a lifelong educator. Like I would love to teach forever, basically. And I think Rice is a really great place that has given me a lot of opportunities. I mean, just the opportunity to be here in the first place, to teach, to give me all this, like this beautiful teaching lab space, all this equipment. And so, I'm going to work with Rice to make sure that, like, yes, we have like the investment in the resources, they have their investment in me. Can we continue then to invest in the students? Are there ways that we can continue to, make the student experience in our department better beyond just buying stuff or hiring people? Because those are good things, those are important things, at least to me, because they gave me a job. But can we continue to develop programs and classes and curriculum for students that is really student focused, instead of trying to work around like, oh, well, no one's ever taught this class before, so we're just never going to teach this class, even though that class could be really important for students. Like that's, I think, what I'm really going to push for during my time here.
Yeah, I think that kind of segues into my next question. I think on your website it says you're bringing like a more modern and practical approach to engineering for students. And so what do you like kind of mean by that? And you think like Rice has a tendency to focus on like the more theoretical aspects or
Yeah, I think it means a lot of different things. I think when I first put that on my LinkedIn, I think it was more the idea like engineering is advancing really, really quickly. And
mm,
so the way a lot of academia kind of works is that you have people as young as me in the department, but you also have people who are about to retire, who are much older. And so education, when these professors were much older, worked one way, but education for people like me works a very different way too. And I'm not saying that to discard like the traditional ways of teaching, but I think as long as we keep in mind, like, it's a sliding scale, like things are going to get more and more modern. And so we have to think about like traditional ways of teaching, like what still works, what doesn't work anymore, take out the parts that don't work and start bringing in like newer things. And so we're going to keep like getting rid of stuff that doesn't work anymore and bringing in new things. And as long as we kind of keep that in mind, you can have a modern curriculum. The issue that I see sometimes with classes and departments is that the people running the show are people who have like one very traditional way of teaching, and they're less receptive to new ways. And so when you eventually want to modernize, you're so far behind instead of kind of working on this sliding scale. And so that's one thing I'm really big on. Like there's a lot of new technology now, not just in the teaching space, but like just like in the general engineering space. There's this conversation about like what programming languages students should learn, what kind of coding tool should they have, because even though you're in bioengineering, you will have to learn how to code. Like that's just an important part of being a modern engineer these days. And so can we find places to put that in, because that's gonna be asked for in job interviews, that's gonna be asked for in graduate school interviews too. So that's really what I mean by modern. It's not just the coding. It's not just like the new teaching tools. It's everything. It's everything about like, going to conferences, learning from new people, learning from people who are trying new crazy things, even like new grading systems, grading styles. That's all part of a modern curriculum, I would say.
right, definitely. Yeah, I think like the constant adaptation to what's going on is super important, helping students stay up to date. And so kind of along like the same lines, like what kind of a role do you think could be contributed by AI in your like particular field? Because I know that's a really big hot topic right now.
Yeah. Do you mean like in teaching or in bioengineering?
I guess both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in bioengineering, as with like other engineering, like AI is exploding. And we definitely need our students to understand where AI comes from and like the pitfalls of working with AI, because AI is like this wonderful black box that can like solve a lot of problems, but can also give you like the wrong answers to a lot of questions too. And so we need to have students who understand the technology enough to sort between what is a good answer and what is a bad answer. And that can look like a lot of different things. You know, if we're using AI to fold proteins, like how do you know the protein has been folded correctly? Or how do you know to trust the solution that AI spits out? If it's medical imaging, like in my field in grad school, like how if AI is making diagnostic decisions, oh, like this is cancer, this is not cancer. What happens when it gets it wrong? What happens when AI didn't find the cancer? What happens when AI says it's cancer, but it's not cancer? You know, like that's what the modern bioengineer needs to be able to do, is like sort between these and have an appreciation for when AI fails, you know, what tools do we have to basically limit the damage that bad AI can create? Because AI, like we can't control it anymore. Well, research is just going to keep pursuing AI. Like there's never going to be a rule that says, oh, you know, your lab can only pursue one project in AI. So people are just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, even when it's not necessarily the best science possible. So if you're going to be in a position in industry or in a research lab working by engineering, like you need to become a lot more discerning about how AI is used. So that's kind of on the like bioengineering side. I think when it comes to the teaching side, personally, I welcome AI. I know like this is where we're in an era where there's a lot of debate about the use of ChatGPT in homework assignments. Like ChatGPT can do a lot of homework assignments with pretty much no effort from the student. To me, I see that as like a really fun challenge as a teacher, because that means I have to, I guess, kind of outsmart AI. I have to design assignments that a student can't just like put the prompt into and then spit out the answer. Because the way I kind of view it is kind of like Wikipedia. Like, yeah, ChatGPT is going to exist, and students will use ChatGPT. Adults use ChatGPT. Heck, like I've used ChatGPT for things myself too. Like, it's a valuable resource. But if all my students get from my class is here's how to use ChatGPT, then I'm not teaching them anything. And so when I say it's like a fun challenge, like I think it's a challenge to think about new assignments that actually get students to think that stuff that can't be answered with just ChatGPT. And that's always going to be a moving target. You know, maybe whatever I design for this year is going to work, but then ChatGPT gets smarter, so I have to design a new thing. And that's I'm okay with that, honestly, like because it's going to push people to become better teachers. It's going to push people to get more creative in their teaching methods, and ultimately, you know, I think that's going to make for much better learning.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great view that you have on ways to, effectively use AI. But yeah, kind of switching gears here, I see that you've written like a lot of publications and journals. And so which of them would you say you're most proud of or like had the greatest impact on your career?
For sure. I think the one on problem-based learning in teaching, it's the only education-based publication that I have, but it's the one I would say I'm most proud of. I worked on it with Ann Satterback from Duke, the professor who was at Rice and then went to Duke the same time I went there. And she had been working with what's called problem-based learning for a really long time. So problem-based learning is the idea that, you know, yes, you can sit in a lecture, learn these equations, and do homeworks and exams on them. But what if we gave you a problem that doesn't actually have a set answer, and you just have to model something? So, for example, one of the projects in Ann's class is, you know, we teach you how molecules move in and out of systems. You know, there might be reactions. So with all that information, that baseline information, model the lungs. That's it. Just model the lungs. It can be any model. You can model, you know, the conversion of oxygen to carbon dioxide. You can model like the bronchioles. Like, it's really interesting to see which direction students take their projects in and what they think is important to the modeling system. And what that allows students to do is it's applying what they learned in class, but they're also synthesizing something brand new. So um, they're designing, you know, they're creating something for the first time, much like, you know, you might design an experiment for a research project, or you're designing a medical device. And so we wanted to measure like how much does that actually improve students' learning? How much does that improve students' confidence in like their abilities? And we found that, you know, there's this teaching theory called like Bloom's taxonomy of learning, and you have like at the bottom like base stuff like remember and understand, like that's like regurgitating information, but the very top is like create and evaluate, which is what you really need to do in a real job. Like no one's going to ask you to do homework problems on a job. Like they're going to ask you to, you know, work on a project, design something new. And so we wanted to see if problem-based learning could really activate those high levels and prepare students to actually be, you know, ready to do this in the real world beyond just class. And so we were really excited to find that, you know, when we surveyed students, they felt like they were getting those high levels, they were becoming more confident in their skills. And so we published it. And I'm really proud of the work that we did, because I think this kind of lends credence to like let's stop just, you know, droning on from PowerPoints. Let's start having some more of this active learning stuff in, and here's one creative way you can do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really inspiring seeing like your passion for teaching and then finding out the ways that works most effectively for students. Yeah, I think throughout your career in academia, you know, have you ever faced like discrimination as an Asian American, or I guess would you say your minority status has ever like shaped your experiences?
I would say in the actual workplace, no. I mean, it's because like I said, I've gotten lucky. I've had good advisors, I've had good people around me, and I've also sought out like good support structures to kind of, you know, keep me humble, and but also like, you know, they're good people to be around. I think the hardest part for me ever in my career was when COVID hit, and like, you know, Asian American sentiment was like an all-time high. And I remember I was walking into lab to just get some work done, and this guy at this bus station like spit at me and was like, you know, like get out of the country. He was not all there, but like it was like really scary, honestly. Like I'd never been spit on before, and like he was like yelling like, you know, men, please stop yelling at people in public. Like that's just an all-around scary thing. And so I think that was just kind of disheartening. That kind of put me into a funk for kind of a long time, because, you know, then you start not seeing the good in people. You start like kind of doubting people. And that's like, you know, 2020 election was going on too. Like things were just not good for the country at that point in time. And I think it was, for me as an Asian American, like kind of important for me to kind of see like, I'm valuable. Like I belong here. Like, it's just because a minority group of people want to say these hurtful things does not invalidate all the hard work I've done in all these other areas of life. Like my Asian American identity is important to me, but like, my identity in teaching is also important to me too. And but like, just because someone doesn't like one part of my identity does not mean like the other parts of my identity are also like invalid. And also my Asian American identity is also not invalid either too. And so kind of seeing, all that go on, like, like there's like some like microaggression stuff that happened like during COVID too. It still kind of persists, with like all these crazy conspiracy theories about what different Asian governments are doing with COVID or infectious diseases is wild for me to see. But being able to just kind of sort through that noise and be like, like these people don't really know what they're talking about. Like they're trying to tear down not just me, but other people who have these full identities, who have all this value, they're contributing at different areas. Like this is annoying, and this is a problem that needs to be solved. But I'm determined to not let that like bring me down.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a really terrifying experience, and I'm really glad you were able to like get something out of it in the end. Um, but yeah, what do you think is your view of like Asian American representation in like, bioengineering, and like are they underrepresented, overrepresented? Do you want to see more Asian Americans, or yeah?
Yeah, I think we're at kind of an interesting point in time now, because there's like a spectrum of Asian American identity. You have Asian Americans who are like second, third, fourth generation, and you have Asian Americans like me who were actually born somewhere else, but like came over very young. So like most of my experience is American, and then you have people who maybe moved like later in life, they're first generation, they moved like for their careers after college, grad school, whatever. And so like maybe their Asian American identity is trending more towards Asian than the American side. And I think it's interesting because I would love to see more representation from the entire spectrum, not just maybe just Asian, like just hiring people who are coming from other countries, or not just people who have been here for a long time. I think being able to have that experience, have different parts of the Asian American experience highlighted throughout my field is important. I think, as much as we talk about like the importance of representation, it's not just like you show someone who has Asian heritage or Asian genes, and that's enough. Like I think there's so much more depth to that, and wherever we can highlight that spectrum of Asian Americanness, I think is ultimately helpful. Because I think about my own personal experiences. I think a lot of the people that I knew growing up, like adults that I looked up to, were either way like Asian side, like, maybe they came here later, they still speak with an accent, like their culture is very much informed by like their home country, versus like very American side, like, they don't speak any like Asian language. And like, both sides have a lot of perspective, but there's also like a middle perspective too, where it's like trying to navigate both sides and trying to figure out like, am I more Asian, am I more American, am I both? Like all are valid answers, but having more role models who can just kind of show that in day-to-day life, I think is, I think, important for Asian American youth.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely like so much diversity even within like just the term Asian American. I think definitely representing a lot of that is really important. And so what advice do you think you would give to like Asian Americans of like the younger generation who are kind of interested in pursuing like an academic career or doing STEM related research?
I would say you're going to face some challenges that are going to seem unfair, but you have to recognize that that's because of the struggles of like other minority groups, other vulnerable groups in this country. Like sometimes I heard this a lot, like, oh, you're the wrong kind of minority, because like Asian Americans are model minority. It's not typically thought of that like Asian Americans go through the same struggles as Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, which is true. My personal sense is like that is true. Asian Americans have a lot of struggles, but if we're gonna get into like the suffering Olympics here, like we're not like worse off. Like we have a lot of benefit given to us. That all being said, I think it's important for Asian American youth to consolidate their idea like what it means to be minority, but not quote unquote the right kind of minority. I don't really like that term, but that's just like the term that you might hear on the job market sometimes, which is terrible. Not really a gentle way of putting that, but that is how people will view Asian Americans. And so being able to understand like, hey, like just because you're one kind of minority, not the right kind of minority, does not mean that you're not valuable. Does not mean that like you're losing this job because of your Asian American identity. It just means that is part of like the whole experience. But I guess like keep on keeping on, because like there's a lot of challenges that Asian Americans face, but there's a lot of challenges that we don't have to face as well. And I think being able to make sense of all of that as an adult you can get a lot of conflicting messages sometimes, for sure. But it's ultimately like, you just have to not let like small microaggressions like that deter you, and really like hone in on like, what is your value, like, and you can provide a lot of value like outside of like whatever your minority status is.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really beautiful way of putting that. And then kind of switching gears again here, I noticed you're involved in many different societies, academic societies, career related, academia related. So do you mind sharing a little bit about some of the work you do and why you first like became interested and involved in them?
Yeah, I think the one that I'm probably most active in now is the American Society of Engineering Education. Like that's the conference I went to earlier this summer. I'm just getting started in this. But I think when it comes to professional societies, it's important to be able to give back to like people who have supported you throughout your whole career. So like a lot of my role models in teaching, they're also part of the society. So right now I'm kind of in this stage where like I'm new in my career. I'm still learning a lot from people. And so I'll keep doing that. But eventually, like, I do have my eye towards, taking on leadership roles in this organization and being able to set up things like faculty mentorship programs or like, more meet and greet events for new educators so they can start connecting with people, not just at the university, but outside their university. Doing things like that for people, I think would be really impactful down the road.
Wow, yeah, thanks for sharing. And then before we move on to kind of like the next portion of our interview, is there anything else you want to share related to career or academia or anything teaching?
I don't think so. I think I've gotten my love of teaching across.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah, your passion is really evident. Yeah, okay, perfect. So now we're gonna move on to kind of a little bit more like perspective sharing to kind of build a more vivid portrait of like who you are. So how would you identify yourself in terms of like ethnicity and nationality?
I would say I'm Thai American, born in Thailand. Both my parents were born in Thailand, but obviously very strong American identity.
All right, definitely. And do you think uh that you've like found like a Thai community in Houston, or is that something that's like a really big part of your life?
I don't really have a Thai community in Houston. And I honestly growing up, like I didn't really have like a strong Thai community. Like there aren't just that many Thai people out there. Like I think, growing up, like I had friends who were Korean and Chinese, and there are Korean community centers, Chinese community centers, but there's not really like a Thai community center. And
Mm.
so, I do wish I had grown up with like that a stronger Thai component to like my cultural life growing up. Like it was relying a lot on like family traditions, going back to Thailand. Um, so no, I don't really have that part.
Hmm. Okay, and so how would you describe like I guess the Asian American community as a whole in Houston?
Very, very vibrant and like I know it's just so diverse. I think that's one of the reasons why I love Houston so much. I think there's, you know, throw a dart at the kind of Asia and there's a group of people like in Houston from there. I think whenever I describe like Bel Air to people, like it sounds like I'm describing like Asian Wonderland, like just like miles and miles of like stores, you know, by Asians for Asians, of all different like ethnicities. I think it's Houston's a really unique city in that way for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like speaking more broadly too, what do you think are some of your hopes for Asian American communities throughout the whole, America, all throughout the United States?
Yeah, kind of going back to like representation of Asian Americans, like professionally, I think just trying to highlight more of like the in between. I think like that's for me personally, like it's growing up, like it was very confusing to kind of figure, am I Thai? Am I American? Am I Asian? Am I American? Like helping younger people sort through their identity in a way that, like a lot of other people don't really have to worry about that. If you are fifth, sixth European American, fifth, sixth generation European American, sometimes you're just American. But if you're in that in between, being able to respect like where you came from, the traditions of your family, but also being open to, well, this is modern American culture as well. And sometimes like trying to reduce some of the code switching that has to occur for younger Asian Americans, I think would be really, really, I think good for Asian American youth.
Yeah, I think definitely finding like that balance of how your identity matters and works for you is super important. And I guess kind of switching gears again here, can you tell me about some of your current hobbies or like interests outside of your career?
Yeah. Well, I love my dog, walk my dog a lot. Um, uh, my wife and I, we really love traveling. We just got back from a trip to Europe. We haven't really done a whole lot of traveling since COVID. And so that's something like we really want to get started back up with. Um, but other hobbies, I run, I bike. My wife is really pushing me to start swimming again. So maybe there's a triathlon in the works. Who knows if I ever, really commit to it. Um, Other than that, spending time with friends. I have a lot of friends still in Houston who were at Rice with me as well. And so that's kind of neat to have that continuity in my community, even though I left and came back. And yeah, just really, I think just like staying active, being social. And then when the budget and time allows for like travel, I really can't stress like how like enriching travel is for me.
Yeah, definitely. And then if you could go back in time and like give a piece of advice to your younger self, what do you think you would say?
Mm, ooh, so much. But I would say very specific piece of advice, but I would say learn more languages. Like, get better at Thai. Like I spoke Thai at home. I was conversationally fluent in Thai, but like learn more Thai. Like learn like how to read more fluently. Also like learn other Asian languages because like, you're going to be exposed to a lot of other cultures, Chinese culture, Korean culture, Japanese culture, and having a respect for other Asian Americans, even though they're from a different country. We have a lot of very similar experiences as well. And then beyond that, like other like, European, South American languages. I think like languages is such an interesting way to like learn about a culture and learn how, people might think, or like, how people make jokes, how like certain traditions are born out of like the way the language was structured. I think it's really interesting. I feel like I'm just saying that because I learned Italian for my most recent trip, and I just enjoyed it so much. And I feel like looking back on my experiences, like, younger, like in middle school, high school, I feel like I could have been a lot more culturally aware and more culturally appreciative of like my own culture and other cultures growing up.
Yeah, definitely. I think language is definitely so interwoven with culture and shows you really a lot about a people group. But what do you think is something that you're proud of?
Mm. I think I am really proud of how focused I was to get a career in teaching. I think there's a lot of deterrence to teaching in academia. You can make a lot more money if you go into industry, especially in engineering. You can have a lot more prestige if you go into research. You also make more money if you go into research as well too. But I think, my wife in particular has been really supportive of my goals in teaching. I think she made a lot of sacrifices to support me to go through grad school, come get here, get to Rice for this job. And I'm thankful to her, and I'm also proud of myself for like, having a goal, sticking to it, and getting a lot of value out of it. Like not once in my goal I've been like, well, I'm just doing this just to do it. Like I've really been motivated by like my joy, like the joy I get from teaching, and not by like trying to make as much money as possible or
Yeah,
have as much
definitely.
prestige.
Yeah, yeah, that's so beautiful to hear. And then our last question for you is, what instances or places do you think make you feel most at home?
Oops, you cut out for a second
Oh,
there.
oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Let me just repeat that. Yeah, our last question for you is, what instances or places do you think make you feel most at home?
Most at home. People who celebrate who you are. Um, I'm really thinking in particular, like of my wife, who is not Asian American. She is, her family is mostly German in descent. But I think the way that she has really embraced, like, when I tell stories of my childhood about like my culture, and she just like she like takes it all in, because like she's like excited to learn like these different parts about me, and like like sees like, even though that's not what she grew up with, like it's not weird. It's not like something that she could never do. It's something that she's like, this is like an integral part to you, and I'm going to support you being you, and like understand like, these cultural experiences shaped who you are now. And that gives me a lot of confidence. I am who I am. Like I can look back at my past and not feel like, oh, I have to explain this in a certain way, or like this is not like, maybe she won't understand this. Like I never feel like that. And I think I've had a lot of people in my life who are like that as well, and just kind of being supportive of me, who I am, not just, as a teacher, as a researcher, as a grad student, as a Rice student, but also like as an Asian American, as a Thai American. That's what makes me feel at home, because once you no longer really have the barriers up of like, oh, I have to code switch in between talking about my Asian American identity and all the other parts of me. Once that's become like a full part of who you are, um, you it's just so much more comfortable. You feel a lot more at ease. You feel a lot more like yourself at all times.
Yeah, definitely. That is really great to hear. And then just before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I don't think so. I just want to thank you and thank the rest of the team. I think what you're all doing is really, really cool. Kind of creating like a mosaic of all the different experiences someone can have as an Asian American. I think that's a really, really neat resource.
Yeah, definitely. Let me pause the recording now.